So, hello and welcome everyone to our introduction to ancestral connections. We are going to talk through, just that our DNA connections, our ancestral connections, our lineage, our genetic line, the way that shows up within our lives, within our decisions, within our choices, and what we can do to make that healthier. So, I think about everyone on here has done some type of work with me before, but just really briefly, I'm Jennifer Main. I help people to kind of tap into and understand their intuition, so that they can be their own compass, their own guide. I also am an initiator. I help people to understand and live their gifts. So I work with a lot of people who are leaders, creatives, artists, um, healers, healing practitioners in those fields. And I've done a lot of work with ancestors, the ancestral line, my own, and with clients and students for well over a decade now. And it's one of the things that has actually fascinated me the most. It's something that I keep coming back to over and over again, for myself and with clients and students, because the content is so rich, and you can have such a massive shift in perspective and in healing and in understanding when you start to understand how your ancestral line has an impact on who you are in this day, in this lifetime. Um, so I found it just really useful to, understand more of that. And I know for a lot of us, we may not know many generations back. We may only know our more kind of immediate family and a few generations behind us. Um, so being able to kind of tap into these memories and connections energetically can be really powerful, because it helps us to understand more of where we've come from and kind of the foundations or some of the blueprints or kind of preconditioning that we have inherited along the way. Um, and but also help us to be proud of our ancestors and the gifts and the things that we've received, and to be able to recognize and understand what they are. So I think a lot of us are moving through life, with gifts and talents and wisdom that they aren't even aware that they have. Um, so being able to tap into this, I find, has been hugely helpful. I know it's made a massive difference for myself, and it's really fun to see what it opens up and helps people to understand about themselves as well. So again, as we go through this, if there's anything you want to ask or share, feel free to use the chat. I will check that throughout, and then we'll stop recording at the very end if people want to ask some other questions. Um, yes. So basically, um, one of the biggest things that I have learned over time, and again, this is my own experience, but also working with a lot of clients who have a focus on their own healing, but also deep down have a desire to help their ancestors to heal as well. Is that, a lot of us come into this plane, into this life, feeling that there's a lot of healing that needs to be done. And I think that there can be a lot of compassion and care in that, but then there also becomes this really interesting dynamic where people feel burdened and they feel obligated to heal their entire family line, to heal their entire lineage, generations and generations, hundreds and hundreds of people. And on a subconscious level, when you're trying to carry that, or when you're trying to fulfill something that is unfulfillable and actually isn't your job to fulfill, we'll talk a little bit more about that too. That can be exhausting. And what that often does is it can create um, resistance, but also resentment towards people you've never even met before. um, and so with a lot of this work, it's starting to kind of pick apart this idea and this notion of what is me, what is mine, what is my path and dharma and my understanding of my life here and now, versus what was my ancestors' path and purpose. What were they here to do? Who were they here to be? And what's interesting is there's often a lot of overlap in that. I really believe we choose our ancestors. They choose us, we choose them, and we choose our ancestral line for a reason. There are things that we want to tap into and understand. There are experiences we want to have. There's wisdom we want to gain. Um, and so we want to celebrate that and be grateful for all of that. But if there is confusion around either having to fulfill hopes and dreams of our ancestors, or if there's a part of us that is unconsciously repeating the mistakes and the patterns and the habits and the ways of thinking that, may have worked for our ancestors or may not have, that's where we can start to feel lost. That's where we can start to feel influenced or impacted in ways that, yeah, bring us out of alignment, that feel really unhealthy for us. Um, so, this first bit of this kind of talk is I really want to talk through kind of picking apart some of this confusion, so that there's not this, yeah, misunderstanding around what is them and what is me. Um, Yeah. So as we go through this, I would encourage you to just to have an open mind. And, we're in an energy of kind of healing and resolution. So you may find that as you're having understandings and aha moments and some things become clearer, you can just, if you want to allow some of that stuff to go ahead and start to shift and change, we're in the energy for that. And that can happen on lots and lots of levels. Um, and can kind of ripple through your life. So we'll talk through some of the main kind of, I don't know, whether you want to call them blocks or problems or limitations within our genetic lines. Um, we'll start with that to, again, just hopefully create some consciousness and some awareness around it. Then we'll start to move into some of the gifts and the things that are lying within you that you can start to tap into and utilize. And then we'll talk a little bit more as well about some of the current energy that we're in and how that can help support you if this is something you want to delve into a little bit more, either in your own practice or, in whatever ways that feel fit. Yeah. So, um, let's talk about karmic cycles first. So I know there's a lot of confusion and misunderstanding around karma and what it is. The one thing I want to really clarify for this is that each of us has our own karma. And our karma is created through the choices that we make every day. So if you think of cause and effect, so it's not about punishment. It's not about teaching lessons in a harsh way. Um, and karmic cycles don't happen to make you learn. I think there's a lot of harshness and criticalness that is kind of looped in with karma that actually isn't karma. Karma is simply cause and effect. And the choices that we make are always going to have an effect at some point down the line, sometimes immediately, sometimes further on. Um, and I think that a lot of times we can feel that we're being punished by karma or we're being punished by mistakes in the past. But the reality is, again, it's just where there's a consequence to the choices that we made. And consequences can be really positive, they can be negative, they can be somewhere in between. So I think for some of this is also kind of demystifying and releasing some confusion around what karma really is. So you create karma for yourself because you make choices for yourself. Nobody else can make choices for you. Nobody else can enforce choices upon you. We've all got free will. And so it's the same for your ancestors. They've made their own choices. They have their own consequences, which ripple through time. Now, it is not your job in this lifetime to undo everything that they have done or to fix things for them. I think we also have a lot of belief systems that karmic cycles can only be resolved in this plane, whereas actually, we're much more than just these human bodies, these human figures. We are also spirit, we're soul, we're divine. So this idea that karma can only be healed by whoever's here and now, and that you have to heal it for your ancestors is just not true. And it's actually not even possible. And the reality is that when we try to fix things for others, we rob them of an opportunity to learn and evolve and grow. Now, the cool thing is your ancestors are watching you now. So they may be learning and evolving just by watching your life and your choices and your decisions and how you're doing things, maybe in the same ways as them or differently than them. So they have an opportunity to heal and evolve in another plane where they are now. So hopefully that helps to lift some of the burden from you. um, but something else that's really interesting that plays in with this, and this will tie in with a lot of what we're talking about tonight, is we create our identities off of what we think makes us important, or what we think makes us powerful, or what we think makes us, I don't know, gives us stature or status, or whatever it is that each of us is seeking in life. It's different for everybody. And if you have an identity that you are the fixer in your family, that you're the one who sorts it out for everyone, that you are the one who is responsible for fixing it all, and that you're the only one that can do it. I mean, that's probably why you're caught in all of this and feeling very burdened and overwhelmed by it. So I would encourage you, if that resonates in any way, just to maybe loosen up that identity of being the fixer, or the one that sorts it out, or the savior of your family as well. That kind of martyrdom savior. I'm the superhero. I'm the one that sorts it out because they can't do it. They don't know any better. They're not whatever enough. Again, that's ego and identity coming into play. That's your subconscious mind creating some funny stuff. So I encourage you to just start to breathe into that and let some of that stuff start to resolve. Um, yeah, and here's the cool thing though, is that whenever we are get caught up in this idea of I have to be the one that fix everyone else, it's too much. If you can bring your healing back to yourself, and whatever is showing up for you right now, whatever is problematic or difficult or feels like an obstacle, if you bring your focus to yourself and your own healing, what can happen is you can resolve issues within yourself that can ripple through your genetic line. And if your ancestors want to have that healing or that awareness, they can have it. It's still their choice. They don't have to have it if they don't want to. They can still be who they are. But instead of kind of seeking outside of yourself, or, oh, I've got to heal this grandmother, I've got to heal this great grandfather, I've got to, all these secrets and problems that were in the family, this ancestor that was so horrible, that was so awful, that did all these terrible things, instead of feeling like I've got to be the one to fix all that or right all the wrongs, it's looking at, okay, well, what is showing up for me right now? What could I heal for myself that would be helpful and useful, and that would help me to be more enlightened and more understanding? And then that can go back through your family line and through time and allow them to heal too. So again, I'm just going to encourage you to lay down some of these burdens and some of these identities and roles and labels that you may have accumulated over time in conjunction with your family or your ancestors. Yeah, because a lot of them may be out of alignment and they may not really be serving you, especially if you're really, really ready to move out of the past and be looking more towards, in the present and looking towards the future. Something else that comes up a lot of times is that our ancestors may be either seeking closure or fulfillment with things that they weren't able to, or that they may feel like they weren't able to obtain in their lifetimes. So if there were unfulfilled hopes and dreams, if your ancestors felt they were on a mission, or it was their dharma or their purpose to do something and they weren't able to do that, sometimes we on a subconscious, unconscious level may feel that it's our duty to fulfill that for them, or to gain the closure, or to, it can be even things like, if a ancestor died and they were in debt to somebody else. If ancestors had oaths and vows and promises to do things or live a certain way, or to live a certain standard, or to, I don't know, not do certain things, all these limitations, these things, sometimes we can carry them through our genetic line. And there are people who, when you start to kind of get into the subconscious, they start to talk about all the things that they have fulfilled in their lives that they didn't actually want to do. And they can be things that are, you on some level you can be really proud of. People go obtain certain degrees or get certain jobs, or they, I don't know, can do these really grandiose things. But then when they start to sit down and look at it, they realize it's not fulfilling and it's not something that actually really called to them on a deeper soul level. It was something that was in their ancestral line that they were trying to explore or understand. Um, so again, just something to maybe be aware of when you're looking at your life, and either the things you're doing now or things in the past, where you can kind of go, oh, well, my ancestors didn't have an opportunity for this type of education or this type of lifestyle or this way of living. So I did that because they weren't able to do it. And I would have felt guilty, or I would have felt bad about not doing that or fulfilling that because they didn't have those opportunities. So again, there's this funny energy that's in that is unhealthy, and that actually you're not doing it for you. You're doing it because you feel like you have to do it for somebody else. So allowing yourself to kind of, again, recognize some of those patterns may help you to either step out of some of those ways of thinking or being, and lay down any kind of, whether it's guilt or shame or, whatever the emotion that's motivating you underneath that. Those are some great things to do. Because again, it's not your job to fulfill all the hopes and dreams of your ancestors, especially if they don't align with who you are now. Um, so in terms of kind of the physicalness of life, some of our ancestral stuff can show up and manifest, physically through illnesses or disorders within the body. It can show up as emotional issues around kind of old trauma, old regret, old pain. It can be more energetic stuff, kind of like the karmic cycles that we were talking about. But what I want to preface all this with is that you are not your ancestors, and you are not obligated to believe in the same things that they believed in or do things the same way. So what usually happens with people is that we will accept conditioning or belief systems or habits and patterns from our family members and from our ancestry for a couple of reasons, and maybe you may recognize you have something a little bit different than what I say. But a lot of times what it boils down to is, as children, as little people, we are dependent upon the grown-ups and our family members, our tribe, to feed us and keep us safe and, clothe us and protect us. And this idea, and again, this is old subconscious, unconscious stuff. We can have these subconscious beliefs that, well, I need to match them so that I fit in or that I belong. So I need to believe the same way. I need to act the same way. I need to do the same things that they do so that I'm part of the tribe. I'm part of the group. So if I can match them, they're going to accept me. So again, this is very subconscious, unconscious, fear-based stuff. Our conscious mind can say, no, that doesn't make sense, or that's not how I want to do it. But, little us or subconscious mind can go, yeah, I need to fit, I need to match. So sometimes it's about that kind of survival aspect of, I just need to fit in and match them so that I get accepted and get looked after and taken care of and loved. There can also be an element of wanting to understand our ancestors, wanting to understand what they went through, what they experienced, to understand how they learned or evolved or grew, what they went through, positive or negative. So oftentimes, again, this kind of repeating of patterns or repeating of behaviors is an attempt to learn and understand. The reality is that we can learn and understand things without necessarily having to experience them ourselves, especially when it comes to illness or, unhealthy patterns, or, living through suffering or, any of these old patterns. So it's kind of when you can start to recognize that, okay, I have accepted some of these belief systems. I've accepted some of these patterns. I can recognize that. Now, what do I want to do instead? And it's not about fighting your ancestry or making them wrong or making them bad or making them less than. It is simply that acceptance of, that was your path, and I can honor that, and I can understand it, or at least I can accept it. And now this is mine. So when you start to kind of pick apart these belief systems, and the beliefs that you have to continue with it in the same way, what that does is it opens up your world to freedom and possibility. And I know I can look back before I started really doing a lot of healing work and understanding how the mind works. I would say I was running on autopilot, and I really was following my ancestry. I was following my family because I didn't feel like I knew what else to do. I wasn't clear on what I wanted. So I made choices based on what they did because I was like, well, it worked for them, so maybe it'll work for me. And so, in terms of my university, my career, all these things that I followed, and it wasn't all totally off, but there were definitely choices I could have made that were different. And I can really look back, and I can even remember having thoughts of, well, this is what they went through, so this is what I'm going to carry on with. I can also recognize family that beliefs that go back generations around like having to work really hard, and you suffer and you get on with it. Like this is just what life is, and you're poor and you're proud of it. And and really kind of these fears around, well, I can't be lazy because my family's not lazy and I'll be judged if I'm lazy. So I've got to work really hard all the time. And I was working like 3 and 4 jobs. I was just doing silly stuff that I hated, that actually wasn't good for me. But again, it was a lot of that identifying with those mindsets and with those generational thoughts that had been carried through and through and through that made up the identity of family. Um, so when I started to recognize how much I was just following just to follow, when I started to question that and pick that apart, what it did was it just opened up everything so that I had more choice. It just gave me more options. And it gave me an opportunity to go, wait, is that actually the type of work I want to do? Or is there something else that's much more aligned for me to do? That's going to align more with my personality, my sense of being, again, my dharma, my purpose. Um, so I think following the ancestry can get you so far, and it may not take you way off course, but for me, it's really about being more conscious with it, being more aware of it. So once you start to recognize what you're following there, you can start to go, okay, actually, do I want to follow this, or is there something more aligned for me? So, some of these old issues can turn up around really old, outdated belief systems, really old, outdated information. And that can come up in terms of, money. People can have a lot of lack and, you know, just limitation in terms of money and abundance and what they are allowed to receive. Again, that old ancestral stuff is poor and proud. Like it's not you're not supposed to be rich. That bad people do that. That's just a belief system. That was their experiences, but you can allow that to evolve and change. You can also start to look at your attitudes towards things like food and what you consume, and how you move your body. So really, the really physical, tangible, kind of real life stuff. If you've got ancestors that went through periods of starvation or, just not having enough, some of that may be showing up in your relationship with food and what you consume and how you spend money and how you receive it. Again, some of these play out in subtle ways, but when you start to kind of tune into this, part of me feels like I'm starving, either starving for attention, starving for food, starving for affection, starving for, whatever that is. Sometimes that links back further than just this lifetime. So it's about kind of recognizing and going, okay, actually, I am not starving. I'm doing okay. What can I evolve in this so that I can recognize what I'm getting and whether it's the right quality and enough for me. There can also be old, outdated belief systems around like masculine and feminine, added towards men and women, towards children, towards, equality, all of these things. You'd be amazed at the old prejudices and belief systems that you carry that you may not even be aware are there. Um, so yeah, just being able to recognize what is coming up into your consciousness, into your awareness, and just starting to question that starts to free you up from of those really old, critical, fear-based belief systems. And it could be that, your ancestors fought another group of people or were invaded or, taken over. They're in their lifetimes, there were reasons to be afraid. But oftentimes we're hanging on to these old perspectives that don't apply to us in this lifetime here and now. You can also find a lot of old stuff in your spiritual beliefs, your beliefs around God, creator, source, whatever terminology you want to use for that. If your ancestors believe that God abandoned them, that God left them to die, that God didn't hear their prayers, that God didn't look after them, again, these things can ripple through. You can start to recognize of, oh yeah, I've got that too. And it's stemming from this. So again, whatever those issues are, if you can recognize they started with your ancestor, a great question to ask is, how does this apply to me here and now? Because it's not just about the past. If it's coming up for you now, there's something in your life that is either mirroring that or has a resonance with something that they went through. And it may not be the exact same situation. So again, like if you had ancestors that went through famine, or through drought, or things that were of the natural world. And again, that those beliefs around I'm starving, I'm lacking, I'm without, you can look at your life now and go, okay, what am I starving? What part of me feels like it's without? What part of me feels like it's shriveling up and dying because it's not getting enough? So you can maybe able to recognize a story within your ancestral line, but it's worth looking at, okay, well, how is this playing out for me now? And again, once you start to address those things in your lifetime now, that can ripple back and can create some healing for them, if they want to allow that. Yeah, so hopefully this is making sense. I mean, again, this can play out in so many layers in so many different ways. Sometimes it's very subtle, sometimes it's very obvious when you really start to look at these lines and kind of recognizing what's been passed down generation to generation. I really feel like we are now at a point we're going to have to disrupt a lot of this stuff, this really old, outdated information, ways of doing things. The world isn't really able to sustain this right now. We as human beings aren't able to sustain a lot of this because we're exhausted, we're run down, we're, we're struggling to get by. So a lot of systems and things have got to change. So I think a lot of this is coming up for people right now because they are recognizing that, yeah, it is time to find a new way, and it's time to do things a little bit differently than past generations have done, or maybe a lot differently in a lot of ways. Again, we could talk about this stuff all night. But if there is a calling for you to disrupt patterns and ways of thinking in your ancestral line, I will say right now, please step up. Like, please do the work. Because it's not only going to help you and your family, it's going to help many, many more of us, because we're all connected collectively through, collective consciousness. All of humanity is connected together. So the work we do for ourselves gets shared throughout the collective. Yeah, so that's just my little plug for, yes, please go ahead. If anybody's waiting for a sign, this is it. Absolutely. Yeah, so if there's any questions so far, feel free to type away in the chat. Yeah, and if there's any questions coming up, just, yeah, let me know, and I'm sure we'll address it at some point. So what I want to talk through now is the stuff around kind of the gifts and the wisdom and the skills in your DNA. So we've talked obviously about some of the negative components and things that we may have inherited, but now I really want to focus on the gifts that are there. So again, I think we choose, well, I really believe we choose our families, we choose our ancestors, we choose those lines because we know that we have a capacity then to tap in to experience that has already been lived. So if you think of your DNA as like a blueprint for being a human being, so you've got this genetic blueprint within you that says you're going to be a human being, you're not going to be a dog or a dinosaur or something like that. You're actually going to be a human being. And you're also choosing the genetic expression for what comes through you. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But we recognize from the people that have come before us that through the genetic line, there are gifts that are passed down from person to person. And maybe not everybody expresses it. Maybe not everybody chooses that. Even in your family, you'll have people that have different gifts and skills. But we've got hundreds and hundreds of ancestors through many, many generations. So there's this incredible alchemy that you can kind of play with, that you can recognize all these ingredients that you can work with. So it becomes really fascinating when you start to look at your family line, and recognizing where there are gifts that show up and some of the common themes and threads that run through. So I know that in my family line, there's a lot of musical talent. I unfortunately did not inherit as much as I wanted to. I took a lot of piano lessons that I'm very glad I did, but I am not a pianist. I definitely have an appreciation and a love for music and an ear for music. And I understand a lot of music and how it works energetically as well as, being nice to listen to. So even though I don't perform as well as like my brother and sister or my grandmother does, I can have an appreciation for it. So, and it's such a joy in my life. It's one of the greatest joys in my life. So I know that that was important to me. Something else I've also been able to recognize is that through my dad's side of the family, there is a deep understanding of faith, and there's a deep understanding of what I would call the Christ consciousness. So for me, that is unconditional love and compassion. It is showing up to be of service to the world. There's a courage there, and a resilience that's there to want to show up as that presence of peace, that presence of love and compassion. I can see it in my grandmother. I can see it in some of my cousins, my brother. Definitely on my best days I have it. And I know that is part of why I chose my ancestral line, because I wanted to tap into that energy and that understanding. It's a massive value for me. It's something I really resonate with. And I know that through my ancestral line, I have a shortcut to that understanding. I have a way of already inherently knowing how to tap into that. Um, so it becomes really interesting when you start to recognize those threads and those themes that run through. And I know sometimes when we're upset with our families, or when we're seeing is the trauma or the pain or the conflicts, the drama that plays out, I know sometimes it's hard to see the gifts. But when you can kind of strip that all back, and when you can kind of allow that stuff to fall away so that you can have a clearer picture, um, then you can really start to appreciate and value them, because your ancestors, they're the ones that put in a lot of the work and the effort and the trial and effort and the failure and the starting from scratch. They've done a lot of that so that we can benefit. So, a lot of times we think we're starting from scratch and that everything is new. Well, if you've got wisdom and gifts and knowledge in your DNA, you're never starting from scratch. There's always something there to build on top of. Oh, yeah, breathe that in. um, yeah, so it's worth remembering that, your ancestors were the pioneers, and they were the inventors, and they were the problem solvers, and they were the creatives. They have all these incredible gifts and skills, which again, you may not consciously be aware of, but all that lives in your DNA. And our DNA is in most of our cells. So we've got a lot of that energy within us. And remember, it's like the blueprint for us. It's helped to create our foundations and our structure for who we are. We can continue to grow with it and evolve it. And if there's stuff that's not working for us, we can dial that down. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But it's worth really recognizing and understanding that, yeah, there's been so much that's been done for us to benefit from. And we honor our ancestors by tapping into it and utilizing it, actually. We talk about wanting to carry things on. We don't want to do it in a way that feels like a burden or an obligation. If we can carry it on joyfully, and incorporate those into our path and our purpose, that is a beautiful way to honor them, and to everything that they've done. Again, whether you're consciously aware of all of them or not. Oh, yeah. So just breathe that in, because I can definitely feel that working through. And if any of you want to share any gifts in the chat that you know of, that you've got, that you've inherited, or at least inherited a little bit of, that's always cool to recognize what's there. Yeah. And some of the things that you think are just you may find that there's an ancestor or two back there that had a hand in helping shape that for you, helping shape your awareness, or your gifts or your strengths. So one of the cool things that we can do, and this is when I'm going to talk a little bit about epigenetics, and I won't go too much into that because I'm certainly not an expert on it, but I have enough awareness of it to understand how it works energetically. And actually, I'll recommend a book. And if anyone else has any books they would recommend, feel free to share them in the chat. But my favorite one is it's a Deepak Chopra and Rudy, somebody, I forgot his name, who's also a doctor. They wrote a book called Super Genes. And yeah, and it's great because it's one of those, it's got enough science in it, but it's not too much. It's not overwhelming if you're not someone who has already studied this stuff. Oh yes, so Super Genes. Deepak Chopra is one of the authors. Oh, and Our Letter Biology of Belief. Yeah, that's a good one too. So with Super Genes, what he's looking at is how our genetics play a part in our health and our well-being and in how we see the world, but they do not define us. And that's the key here. And so they look at things like illnesses, disorders within the body, and how we believe that if an ancestor or family member has something, we're going to get it. The reality is that that's very, very rare that it actually has to happen that way. And that actually there are things that we can do to change our genetic expression. So we used to think that genetic expression was like an off and on switch, like flip that disease on. Yes, you get that eye color. Yes, you get that personality trait. Yes, you get that. Actually, what they're finding is they're more like dimmer switches, which I think is a great way to look at it because you can kind of play with dimmer switches and you can dial things up and down. It feels much easier than off and on. So what this does is when you start to think about your genetic expression as being something that you can play with and that you can dial up and down in ways that are useful for you, what that does is it gets you out of that mindset of I'm trapped in my genetics. I'm trapped in my ancestral line. I'm doomed to make the same mistakes. I have to go through the same lessons and karmic cycles that they went through. It just helps to kind of loosen that up so that you can recognize that actually there are things in here that I can change with this. And in the book there's all kinds of things about it's diet, exercise, the way you eat. I mean there's loads and loads of different things you can choose, which again is great because it shows you it's not just one thing that you do that makes this change. There's so many ways that you can change this stuff, and it's not something we are stuck with. So anything that we're doing that helps heal our bodies can help with our genetic expression. It can change that for the unhealthy components. Anything that we're doing that challenges old belief systems or old ideas or perceptions around how the world is, and how we think it's supposed to be, being able to address that is going to help to change that genetic expression, and it's going to help you see the world in a different way with clearer eyes, with fewer filters. So instead of seeing the world through your ancestors' eyes, you see them through your own, and you can be informed by the truths that they carry and by the gifts and the wisdom, but without it just being their perspective that you are seeing the world through. I know that something I had to address at one point, which I was really surprised about when I realized I had this belief, was I really was fighting to hang on to some old perceptions and belief systems because I had to believe that my ancestors were right. And if they were wrong, then oh my gosh, what had I been fighting for or believing in or trying to prop up for so many years? So I thought it was loyalty, but it was really misplaced. And so again, this is all the unconscious stuff that we stay loyal to, that we stay dedicated to because we think it is the right way. We've been told it's right for such a long time. And how much energy is going into proving people right or proving other people wrong? And I mean, that's a really common thing for a lot of people, but it can definitely play out with our ancestors because we want to be proud of them. We want them to have been on the right side of history. We don't want to be, we don't want to admit if they've done things that maybe weren't the right choices at the time, the healthiest choices at the time. Oh yeah, feel that. Yeah, so I would really encourage you to start to just, in your own meditation or in your own time, start to question some of the things that you were told growing up or some of the behaviors, the perspectives that you witnessed your family members or that were part of your ancestral line. just start to play with those ideas of, asking the question, how true is that really? Or was that just their perspective of the time and I can have a different one now? And do I need to continue to do things in the way that they did them? Why do I feel like I need to do that? And actually, is that true? Is there another option that's much more aligned for me? So something that I've recognized in terms of kind of the overlap is I know that part of my dharma or purpose is to be a healer, to be a teacher, to help people to connect with their spirituality and understand themselves on a deeper level. I have family members who are very religious and spiritual as well in their own way, but not in a way that aligns for me or that works for me. It's too conservative for me. So I spent a long time trying to fight against that and trying to make it wrong and make it, I don't do that. I'm not like that. I'm not doing it the same way. And then I had a realization one day when I was meditating, and it was the realization that actually we're all trying to do the same thing. We're all trying to help people connect with God. We just have very different ways of doing it. And so, so what I've been looking at over the years is, again, it's looking at that if there's a recognition that we have a lot of the same goals. We want people to have a life that is filled with love and connection and compassion, and that idea of higher self, the divine, all of that. So my question is again, I can love my ancestors, I can love my family members, I can appreciate that they do it in a different way. I still want to have the purity of that intention and the lightness of that, but also do it in the way that aligns fully for me. So again, I don't want to reject them. I don't want to throw all that away, but there's also finding that space and that freedom to express it in the way that aligns for me. So again, you may find that a lot of your dharma and your purpose aligns with a lot of what your family has been doing, or somewhere in your ancestral line, you may just want to do it in a different way. So it's kind of finding the subtleties within that, and making sure that you can, again, build on those foundations, but without feeling confined or limited by them. Yes. So I'm going to answer these questions in just a few minutes, guys. These are good ones. So in terms of like the current transits right now, and I won't go too much into the astrology because this isn't an astrology call, but I do want to just help you recognize that the energy is really potent right now to deal with this stuff and to really look at these things. Because the Jupiter transit we've got right now. So the idea with that is that Jupiter is about our gifts. It's our dharma. It's our purpose. It's how do we show up with our strengths? How do we show up with our wisdom? How do we show up in service to the world by living our gifts? So it's really this idea of, I show up as me, bright and visible and here, and I am living in alignment with my own higher self or soul, however you want to put that. So we've got all this energy showing up right now, which is saying, find your gifts, live your gifts. So again, that some of that might be in connection with your ancestry, your ancestral lines. We've also got a lot of energy in Taurus, which is real life. It's what do you value in your daily life, in your real life? What do you find beautiful? What do you find inspiring? Textures, colors, art, music, it can be those qualities, but also, how does your body feel light or clear or beautiful, or I don't know, again, however that resonates for you, whatever you're wanting that to feel. So it's really about real life. How do I make my real life beautiful? How do I make my real life something that is, what I value, that is in alignment with my values? So you can explore, for some people, they want a life that's really peaceful. Some people want a life of adventure. You may find you want a bit of both on different days, maybe, I don't know. But again, it's that really looking at what do I value and what is worthy of my time and energy and attention. So having these energies combined of I'm going to live my gifts and I'm going to show up as I really am, and I'm going to do it in a way that's tangible and real and everyday and grounded and present. Like that's a powerful, powerful combination. So if you can spend time either working through and healing the ancestry or the stuff that's showing up within you, that's going to free you up so that you can recognize that more. And also, if you want to spend some time meditating or connecting with your ancestors and gaining some insight and some clarity, on what their gifts and skills were so that you can bring that in and amplify it within yourself. That is also hugely, hugely beneficial. Something else is coming up that might be worth just having an awareness of is that you may already be trying to tap into some of your ancestral gifts without knowing it. So I know that I've had, I had a period of time where I really felt like I wanted to learn how to sew. And I'm not a really crafty person. Like that's not really my thing. And I learned a little bit about it and I enjoyed it. And it was, it was useful for me to do. And then I learned that I have a great grandmother who used to sew all the time. And we were given a few of the things that she made, and her work was beautiful. But you could feel the love in it. Like it was that recognition of being able to craft and create and make something that is beautiful, that is wholly made from love. And so I think part of me was trying to tap into her energy and learn how she did things. And it came through learning how to sew, but it wasn't really about the sewing. It was more about connecting in with her energy. Yeah, so there may be little things like that showing up for you and some of your interests or things that are kind of pulling you. And so again, just having that awareness of, is this something that I'm doing to either help myself heal and grow, or is this a gift I'm trying to develop that may already be present within me that I can just amplify again? Yes. So what I'll do is I'll go through and I'll answer some of the questions that are here. Again, we'll do some at the end without the video. And then I'll take us into a little meditation. Yes, yes, yes. So Caroline, patterns of single female, single parent, and older generations of family, 10 family members, single widowed or single parents. Yeah, that's really interesting. That's a good question. I mean, again, I don't know the whole story, but it might be worth kind of looking into what might be some of the underlying pains or traumas that create that. So I mean, is there stuff around, are there habits or patterns of either being left behind, being abandoned? Are there, is there a pattern of either heartache or, feeling unworthy? Is there stuff around, it could just be kind of boundaries and relationship stuff and being able to recognize who your most aligned, compatible kind of soulmates and connections are. I mean, this could go in about 100 different ways, but it might be a combination of some of those. But I would say it'd be worth kind of meditating on, is there a theme or a couple themes that run through that has created that pattern so that it's something that has been accepted through the genetic line, accepted as real. So yeah, I would say meditate on that and see what comes through in terms of more the heart stuff. And yeah, hopefully that helps. I know it's hard to answer some of these questions, especially when there's there's so many possibilities. But yeah, I would meditate on that and actually speak to your, energetically, you can speak to your ancestors. We'll do that in a couple minutes actually, so you can ask them then, to ask what needs to be healed or understood or resolved within that, so that can heal through the family, or at least within you. Yeah, hopefully that helps. Let's see. When the Body Says No, Francesca, is a fantastic book with lots of research regarding patterns. Thank you for sharing that too. I don't think I've read that one yet, but it is definitely on my list because I've heard it enough times to know that I should read it. Loretta says, yep. And Gabor Mate is fantastic. Yes, definitely. So where do you put the sense of guilt? I struggle a little there. I lost mom and dad last 4 years, defining myself as a unique person, but there's sometimes a sense of guilt, especially regarding femininity. Yeah, so I would say instead of trying to put the guilt somewhere, I would say ask why it's there in the first place. So anytime we're hanging on to negative belief systems or emotions, there's always some information in that. There's always some positive messages about what you can do differently, what you can change, what you can understand. So allowing yourself to say, what is the positive message that the guilt is trying to share with me? And listening to that can be really, really useful. Yeah, and in terms of femininity, masculinity, things like this, again, yeah, some of these are just very old perceptions around what you're supposed to do, how you're supposed to be, how you're supposed to show up. and again, I think a lot of what we're doing right now is we're rewriting a lot of that, so that we're bringing more choice into it and more flow and more understanding of what those labels and identities really are, what those energies really are. I think they've been really confined and constricted for so long, and they've been made separate and they've been made wrong. So I think a lot of what we're doing now is redefining that so that we can tap into our masculinity and our femininity and have them work together instead of feeling like one is bad or wrong, or one is supposed to be more than the other, all those fun concepts that we can get caught up in. Yeah, so I would kind of have a look at what the fear is around that. What are you afraid of? What were your ancestors afraid of in terms of femininity? And yeah, and see if you can allow that to rest and resolve, because that's just old, outdated stuff. Yeah, definitely. Hopefully that helps. Cool. So Arletta, what is loyalty? Oh, such a good question. Yeah, so with loyalty, yeah, no, you don't have to agree with someone. You can actually disagree with someone and still be loyal to them. I think our concepts of loyalty, it can be very all or nothing, black and white. It's this thing of, well, if I'm loyalty, I have to agree with everything. I have to do it, go along with it all. I have to do that. But actually, there's the sense of we can be loyal to ourselves, and we can be loyal to other people in terms of their integrity, their honesty, their truth, their compassion. We can be loyal to their values and their virtues. We can be loyal to their missions. We can be loyal to their visions and, things like that. But we can also challenge aspects that are out of alignment. We can challenge aspects that are unhealthy, and we don't feel like we need to be loyal to something that doesn't align for us or that doesn't work anymore. And actually, it's healthy to challenge those things, whether they're in yourself or within other people. Yeah, so loyalty is not a blind loyalty or a blind just bowing down, disempowered. I'll just go along with whatever you say. There's still healthy boundaries within that loyalty, and you can choose. Yeah, again, I would focus on what are the values and the virtues I want to be loyal to, and how can I cultivate that within myself and live that, so that I can recognize what is worthy of my loyalty. Yeah, so hopefully that helps. Yeah, decluttering and restructuring physical environment. It's time. It's really, really time for sure. Right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take us into just a really brief meditation, just a couple minutes or so. And this is an opportunity for you to connect with your ancestors and to be able to just receive some information. So just receive that information however you get it. Some people are visual and they see, some people are auditory and they hear, some people it's more of a feeling, they feel the answers, and some people just have a knowing for what's coming through. You may have a combination of those things as well, but just I would encourage you just to relax into this and allow whatever insight or information comes through. If you just get one word or one feeling, amazing, start with that. Sometimes we can get a little overwhelmed if a lot comes through, so allow yourself to just receive whatever is the most important thing for you to recognize, and that can be your starting point for your own inquiry or meditation or conversations with your ancestral line. Right, so I'm going to take us into just a couple minutes meditation, and again, I'm just going to talk you through this. I would encourage you just to be open to receiving, just to relax into that. And if you find yourself getting into your head and trying to figure out or think too much, just to breathe into that and come back into your body, come back into your heart, so that your thinking mind isn't conflicting or getting in the way of you receiving some other information. Right. So if you want to sit back and get comfortable, taking a few nice deep breaths. And I'm going to invite you to close your eyes if that feels comfortable for you. Sometimes that can help us go more into our bodies and more into our intuition. And just start by taking a couple nice deep breaths. And as you're taking those breaths, just start to feel your body relax, feel your joints soften. And allow your mind and your nervous system to just kind of calm and quiet down. Not in a way that you're suppressing, but just to allow it to kind of slow down and be more easy. Any racing thoughts, anything that your mind keeps getting drawn to, we'll just allow it to relax for a few minutes. And we'll actually invite your mind to be present with you during the meditation so it can help you receive information. It can help you remember what you're receiving. And just bring your attention down into your heart. And to start with, just breathe in and out of your heart for a little bit. And all we're doing with the air and the breath is just starting to loosen up some of that energy. So if any of your heart or the energy in your heart is feeling stuck or heavy or too fixed or dark, just keep breathing in and out of that energy. And let the air and your breath start to shift it. So you don't need to push or pull or try to make it do anything. You're just simply setting the intention that your heart is beginning to open so that you can receive. Just keep feeling your body relax. Feel your body soften. And just feeling more at ease. Now we're going to call in your ancestors. We're going to ask them to come forward. And again, you may be able to see them. You may be able to hear them. Maybe more of a feeling, or you may just know that they're there. Whatever you get is perfect. So just allow them to be present with you right now. And to start with, we're just going to ask if there is anything present for them. It's a strong issue that they could use some healing with. That's also showing up within you. So if they have any unfulfilled dreams, any disappointment, any grief or sorrow because of that, and you can recognize that's also something you're struggling with right now. Just start to recognize some of those issues carried through the genetic line. And we'll just start with one for now. Allow yourself to recognize one that's really playing out for you, that may be creating some drama or conflict, or that's deeply emotional or heavy for you. And you may get a sense of a few or more ancestors who may have had similar things go on with them. And again, it could be unfulfilled dreams, disappointments. It could be physical issues that go through the genetic line. It could be issues in relationships that show up over and over again. Just notice what you're picking up on right now. And as you're recognizing those issues that have played out through the generations, I want you to also allow your ancestors to share with you what would help heal that. So they already may be aware of the answers. So whether that's more understanding, more patience, whether it's receiving more love, whether it's setting healthier boundaries, whatever the answers are, allow your ancestors to share that with you. Whatever it is that they are saying that they need or want, set the intention that they receive that now and that you receive it too. Because if it's coming up for them right now, it will also be coming up for you. So whatever lessons or understandings or virtues would be useful, imagine that you're receiving them now. And that can go through your genetic line too. We're going to take a moment to feel some gratitude and appreciation for what they've gone through, for all they've experienced and learned that has helped to shape us in so many ways. Now for this last bit of the meditation, we're going to ask your ancestors to show you their gifts and the ones that most apply to you in your lifetime. So if you had ancestors that were creative or inventive, if you had ancestors that knew how to communicate and express themselves well, you had ancestors that were brave or courageous, you had ancestors that knew how to create communities and connect people. Whatever it is that would be useful for you in your lifetime now, let those ancestors step forward so you can recognize it's already in your genetic line. There's already something for you to build on. Whatever those gifts are, those strengths, that wisdom that you've been seeking, it's in your genetic line, it's in your cells, it's in your body. So allow yourself to start to feel those strengths and gifts within your body and allow it to amplify. And you don't need to know how this works. Simply be willing for that to happen. You may get a sense of other gifts and strengths that are there. So allow yourself to recognize them. Take note. There is more there than you've known. So we'll take a moment to express our thanks to our ancestors for the gifts that they offer, for the wisdom that they freely give, for everything that's already within our genetics, within our programming that's there to support us so that we can thrive and grow. And if there's any last bits of guidance or clarity that your ancestors can offer you, take a moment to receive that now, even if it's just a word or a feeling. And taking a few last deep breaths. Whenever you're ready, you can open your eyes. What we'll do is I'll stop the recording here, and then we can share anything that's coming up or any last questions.